They found her frozen in bed, next to the Khan's body, which no one had touched for 9 days. Her fingernails had been torn out, and between her lips was a clump of fox fur, clenched until it was bloody. They said she was his favorite, but her name was not on the list of concubines. The winter of 738, according to the Sarai calendar, was the harshest in the last 3 decades. The river froze 2 cubits deep, horses froze in the stables, and even the meat in the Khan's storerooms cracked from the cold. Rumors spread throughout the courtyard. Someone had whispered to the Khan that a contagious disease had spread among the concubines, and he ordered their hall to be sealed. But the guards, who later carried the corpses out, claimed that there were jugs of warm wine in the hall, that it smelled of fat and honey, and that the bodies were naked, with crimson spots on their chests and dried blood in their ears. The last Khan of the Golden Horde, Talgat Bek, had not been seen in public for over a month. According to chronicles, he suffered from severe abdominal pain, constant thirst, and convulsions accompanied by screams that could be heard even outside the palace walls. The court physician, an old Uzbek named Kadzir, ordered a decoction of birch bark and goat's blood to be prepared for him, but according to the guards, he drank only pure water. A report marked, "For the vizier's eyes only," stated, "His Excellency's tongue has darkened, and when he breathes, black liquid drips from his nostrils. His eyes are cloudy, his voice is hoarse. He talks to women who are not in the room." From the secret protocols kept in the archives of Bukhara, according to information from the inner guard, the Khan forbade changing his bed. He ordered that his sores be covered with bird feathers and that the scars on his back not be touched, claiming that they were signs from heaven. He ate only meat covered in blood and ordered that virgins be brought to him. Of the 40 concubines in the harem, 19 disappeared within 2 months. The bodies of 6 were found in a frozen lake, naked with bluish bruises on their throats. The rest were never found. A personal note left by Vizier Jalal on parchment reads, "He ordered all the walls of the harem to be repainted white because dirt speaks." The courtiers began to complain about the stench coming from the winter bedroom, putrid, cloying, with a hint of iron. The walls of the bedroom were covered with skins soaked in sweat, fat, and blood. Servants entered with rags over their faces and quickly lost consciousness. When the Khan began to urinate in clumps resembling boiled tar, they began to give him human bile to drink. It was believed that it would burn out the internal rot, but this only caused convulsions. He was shaking, his face turned black, and the skin on his temples cracked. The court physician wrote, "He can no longer sit up. He must be tied to the back of the throne, otherwise he will slide into his own excrement." He refused to be washed, claiming that water caused him pain. Ulcers appeared on his shoulders, first the size of a coin, then the size of a palm. A murky liquid with the smell of rotten eggs oozed from them. By order of the Khan himself, a second wall was built around the winter bedroom. Only one person had access to the interior, a guard named Kadir. 3 days later, he was found dead with his stomach ripped open. His intestines had been unwound and laid in a circle around the bedroom threshold. A note to the chief vizier said, "This is a sign. He did not want to let in the woman with the face of his mother." According to several concubines, this woman was the most silent of all. She had no name. She never spoke, but the Khan allowed her to touch his back, and only her. Screams continued to echo in the chambers, sometimes followed by shrieks. Then there was silence. 9 days later, the door was broken down, the room was cold, the windows frozen from the inside, the candles long since extinguished. The Khan's body lay on its side, his mouth open, his tongue hanging out. The sores on his face had turned grey. His ears and eyes were oozing. There was a smell of rotten, fatty bones. On his chest were nail marks, as if someone had held him tightly by the heart. The woman next to him was dead. Her hands were clenched in convulsions, her nails broken, her lips torn. The court physician wrote in a treatise compiled later, "It could have been black liver abscess or poisoning, but more likely it was a bodily derangement that turned into spiritual decay. This happens when a person allows the wrong will to enter their flesh." The Khan's body lay on a stone bed for 3 days, while the senior viziers deliberated over who should be allowed to examine it. The palace was cordoned off, the servants dismissed, and the guards replaced. The room where the dead bodies were found was wrapped in cloths soaked in vinegar and ashes. The smell did not disappear. 2 days later, it penetrated the corridors, and the guards began to complain of headaches, nausea, and weakness in their legs. According to the report of the physician Kajir, compiled on the 3rd day, his face was dead. Like that of a drowned man, his eyelids were swollen, his skin was rough like sheep's wool, and a cloudy liquid oozed from his eyes. His lips were torn and covered with a coating, and his mouth was black. The sores on his neck have festered and burst. He smelled of wet earth and rotting flesh. 2 of the 3 assistants who conducted the external examination later fell ill with a high fever and did not regain consciousness. Their bodies were burned in the backyard without ceremony. The doctors argued about whether to autopsy the body. The elders suggested simply washing it with vodka, rubbing it with salt, and burning it along with the chambers. But the Khan's council demanded accountability. 2 days later, the corpse was moved to a separate room. The transfer was accompanied by vomiting among the bearers. A dark, sticky mass remained under the Khan's back, smelling like burnt fat. His back was covered with ulcers, mold, and claw marks, as if he had scratched himself to the bone. The courtiers began to argue about who was to blame. Some whispered about a nameless woman who had been sent by strangers and planted in the harem on the orders of Western princes. Others claimed that the Khan himself had summoned something through smoke that he could not control. An archival record from Vizier Nur Muhammad reads, "One night, I heard him scream that a beast had taken up residence in his heart, that he felt claws under his ribs, and that when he slept, someone was licking his throat from the inside." Meanwhile, the Council on Succession met every day, but decisions were delayed. The Khan's son, Batu Jr., was under surveillance on suspicion of plotting a coup. The Khan's brothers insisted on complete isolation of the palace. Food supplies in the chambers were burned. The walls were splattered with lamb's blood. Shamans beat drums, but the guards continued to disappear. 3 in a week, leaving no trace. One was found in a pit, eyeless, with a cracked rib cage. A servant, who picked up bedding, later described the state of the chambers. There were nail marks on the walls, tufts of hair, and maggots between the boards, even though it was winter. On the floor was a frozen crust of liquid that even braziers could not melt. By order of the council, the entire room was flooded with resin and set on fire. According to eyewitnesses, the flames were black as soot and gave off no heat. Attempts at embalming failed. The body would not accept the resin. The tissues slipped away like boiled skin and cracked at the slightest touch. The rib cage caved in. One of the carvers wrote in a note, "We can't even insert a needle. Everything slips and cracks. This is not a dead man, it's an empty wineskin." The autopsy was cancelled. Instead, they ordered the body to be wrapped in vinegar-soaked cloth and poured into a vat of wax. but the wax cracked after a day. Meanwhile, rumors began to spread throughout the city. Merchants gathered at the gates of the Sare, demanding to know who was now in charge. Shamans in the bazaars predicted an icy famine. People said that warm water with a taste of iron was flowing from the wells, and that women's whispers could be heard from the ovens. Several women who had served in the harem disappeared. Murder was suspected. From a letter from the ambassador of Bukhara, yesterday I was told that the harem is closed, but screams can be heard every night. Rumors are circulating that someone is trying to continue the rituals over the body of the deceased. They say that the heart has not decayed. In the 4th week, the Khan's body was secretly taken out of the city, wrapped in 6 layers of cloth. The order was given not to bury it, but to wall it up in the basement of a hunting lodge. However, it later became apparent that the room had swollen from the inside, and a foul odor was coming from the cracks. The building was then dismantled and burned along with the body before dawn. Nevertheless, according to reports from eastern settlements, a month after the burning, faceless boys appeared, wandering the roads and speaking in the old Horde dialect. They were killed, but they returned, and in the house of the senior vizier, red stains appeared on the walls that could not be washed off. 17 days passed after the bodies were burned. During this time, not a single window was opened in the camp. The carpets covering the floors were rolled up and taken out onto the ice of the Volga, where they were burned along with firewood, sheep's urine, and pieces of icons. The air in the palace remained thick. Some described it as a musty bandage placed over the mouth. The council, unable to choose a new Khan, split into 2 camps. Some promoted the candidacy of the deceased's brother, the old and paralyzed Shagai, who had not left his bed since autumn. Others secretly brought in the young sons of concubines to swear allegiance, hoping to use them as a screen for their own power. Almost all the women who survived December were sent to distant ayuls or strangled in bathhouses. No official search was conducted for the nameless concubine who allegedly poisoned the ruler. In a report by Shirai's servant, they say she is gone, but I saw one of the bathmaids hang herself on an intestine from a bloody basin, and her hair was black like hers. The body was burned without identification. Meanwhile, the dying did not stop. The chief seal carver, who had lived at court since childhood, suddenly went mad, cut out his tongue, and died in his room. His tongue was found not on the floor, but in the mouth of a goat tied up in the courtyard. The surgeon, who examined the body, said, "There are no signs of violence on the throat. How the tongue was placed there is unclear. The animal's mouth is closed, but not torn." At night, someone continued to leave offerings in the Khan's empty chambers. Honey, coins, hair, and black eggs. The guards claimed that no one had crossed the threshold. 6 warriors changed the guard in one day. One fled into the steppe and was never found. Another fell face down on the ice near the southern well and froze to death, clutching a tight bundle of wool in his hands. The doctors insisted that the Khan's death was caused by internal decay brought on by overheating of the liver. They described a picture of decay without heat, a rare condition in which the body loses its internal fire and begins to rot alive. In a treatise by the scholar Nassar, compiled from the results of observations, on the 4th day, his nails fell out, his eyelids cracked, and a rotten liquid resembling melted lard flowed from his ears. I noticed that the internal organs seemed to continue moving even after the heart had completely stopped, as if the intestines were turning on their own. His work was banned a month after it was written and burned. priests refused to perform prayers. One of them claimed that blood poured from his mouth as he read. Another shouted that he heard songs burned into the bones. Vizier Burak, who personally supervised the removal of the body, began to suffocate in his sleep and died on the 7th night, leaving claw marks on his pillow. Doctors pronounced him dead. The people were cursed. Famine broke out in the camp. Flour began to smell of mold. Meat rotted in the cold. People said that the last horses were not producing offspring. Women stopped menstruating. The bones of babies wrapped in red cloth were found in frozen rivers, an archival report from a slave named Chingizbek. I heard smoke coming out of the burned-down hall at night, and there was a figure standing in it, thin, faceless, with breasts wrapped in hair. She was scratching at the door and whispering something like, "Let me back in." His words were recorded, and he himself was later found in a well. On his forehead was a mark, similar to the family symbol of the deceased Khan. Some members of the council insisted on completely abandoning the palace. Others suggested walling it up with everyone inside. But neither side dared to act first. Everyone waited. They said that not only the harem, but also the Khan's throne itself was now cursed, and that any new ruler who ascended it would die that same winter. Either way, the council was left without a leader. Meanwhile, on the outskirts, troops of former allies began to appear, no longer to pay tribute, but to seize territory. In the spring, warriors from Bulgar arrived, and for the first time in 40 years, did not bow to the Khan's headquarters. The West remained silent. The East was preparing for a transition, and in the very heart of the headquarters, they still could not open the windows. At the end of February, when the ice on the Volga began to crack, envoys from Timur Kala arrived at the camp. They were greeted without salutation, without horses, and without music. The letter they delivered contained a proposal to establish temporary rule through a council of tribes until a pure heir could be elected. One of the ambassadors was an old man with a rotten ear. He smelled of vinegar and salt. His hands were bandaged. He said, "You are rotting," and refused to admit it. "While there is still warmth within these walls, we will not take you. Then we will take your ashes." 2 days before their arrival, bloody traces reappeared in the chambers where the Khan had once slept. They stretched from the tomb to the bed, which was now empty. An imprint remained on the fabric, as if someone had lain down on the skin, leaving a dark mark and a slimy, oily liquid. That morning, the chief physician died, his face swollen beyond recognition and black spots on his tongue. The surgeon, whose name was Kudai, made the following conclusion: "The liver has disintegrated, the spleen has become slimy, the bones have begun to twist inward. I have never seen anything like this on the battlefield or in butchers' pits." He disappeared a day later. His assistant later revealed, "I found his writings." He wrote that the Khan's body was still alive after cremation because the blood did not burn, but flowed downward. He believed that what they burned was only a shell. During this period, only the inner circle remained guarded. Access to the chambers was restricted. Even the oldest noble families complained that they could not send their young sons to have their status confirmed. The guards, posted at the doors, behaved erratically. One of them, left on duty at night, gouged out both his eyes with the sharp edges of a ritual mirror. Another went on a slow hunger strike. He refused to eat or drink and remained silent until he wasted away. His body was found in a corner with broken fingers and petrified skin. A note from the priest, Banuzade, said, "No one wants to bury the throne. We have already buried the body, but we forgot the seat of power. It remains here, like a rotting fruit that does not fall but hangs." The animals have begun to shake violently. Horses are throwing off their saddles Dogs are biting their owners. This is not the plague. This is the remnant of the dead man's will. On the 5th day of March, it was decided to remove the Khan's throne, carved, covered with fabrics, and inlaid with bones. 2 carvers who volunteered to do the work died from ulcers that broke through the skin on their stomachs. The pus was grey and smelled like metal. The clothes were burned. The throne was carried out onto the ice. 2 days later, a boy from the village found it sitting in the icy water, empty-eyed, dead, but smiling. The women of the palace who had survived in the harem began to pray to the walls. Some covered themselves with soot and sheep bile ointment. On the 3rd day after that, the walls of the bedroom became damp despite the frost. Thin clots of reddish liquid appeared on the windowsills, smelling of honey and sweat. Some called it tears. Others called it a curse. At the same time, the woman who was considered the Khan's last concubine went into labor. No one knew her name. The labor lasted 6 days. All the babies she gave birth to were dead. She held the last one, whose skin was like a snake's, in her arms until she died. She was buried with him in a stone bag, without prayers. One of the servants claimed to have heard the child calling someone's name in the night after the burial, whispering in the snow, "Give me back the light." In the 6th week of spring, beetles began to crawl out of the southern wall of the palace. First, they came one by one, then in streams. They were caught, dried, burned, and the walls were smeared with ashes, but they returned. Some had traces of white fluff, others had letters gnawed into their backs. The old priestesses said that these were signs, the name of the deceased, his breath, scratched out piece by piece. At night, voices could be heard. Sometimes they spoke in languages no one knew. Sometimes they sang something that sounded like the funeral chants of the steppe dwellers. One of the scribes wrote, "They sing of a harem, of a woman in ice, of the one who carried a child that was not alive, but a reflection. She was the key, and now the door is open." This record was taken away. The scribe was taken away in chains and drowned in a sack. By this time, political power had completely collapsed. One of the brothers died from bleeding from his ears. Another went mad, smeared himself with fat, and burned himself to death in the hearth. The heir, recognized as the son of a concubine, was strangled on the day of his recognition. The viziers accused each other of treason. Some tried to flee, but they were caught by dogs bred for hunting in the steppes. They were uncontrollable. When the last snow melted, the first bones appeared from the palace foundations. There were more than 20 of them, small, child-sized, with the joints scraped clean. Some lay in circles, as if they had been placed there by hand. The guard's report said, there was a niche under the walls of the bedroom. In it were pottery, hair, and a stone with a face carved into it. The eyes on the stone had been gouged out with a knife. They tried to rebalsam the Khan's remains in secret, at night, behind closed doors. The cloth in which the ashes were wrapped tore when touched. Instead of ashes, a grey-green mass spilled out, containing fragments of bone, pieces of teeth, strands of hair, gilded threads, and a carved wooden fragment with a burnt symbol of the sun. It smelled of rot, resin, and honey. One of the embalmers soon went blind. The second began to scream that someone was breathing inside the bag. He hanged himself with a strap from the burial bag. Another was found with a cracked rib cage, as if someone had been fighting to get out from inside. When the people learned of the failed ceremony, riots broke out. Supporters of the old nobility demanded that the capital be moved. A group of elders, armed with knives, tried to break into the harem. They wanted to take the remaining women, believing them to be carriers of cold blood. capable of bringing power. Their bodies were found a day later. One had been beheaded, another cut open from groin to throat. No one survived. All traces led to an empty bed. A letter from Sarai reported, "The stake has fallen. Power has not been transferred. Everything has dissolved in fear and blood. We did not receive the bodies. We received a sign. There will be no more Khans here, only traces." The consequences were swift and irreversible. Several Horde princes declared themselves pure of women's blood. They destroyed old symbols, burned carpets from the harem, and erased the name of the deceased from seals. The palace guards were killed, the archives were burned. The remaining women from the harem disappeared into the steppes or were sold as captives. Venetian merchant Piero dell'Orto, who visited the ruins 3 months later, wrote, "I saw a frozen hall with stains of fat and mercury. There were marks on the walls as if made by claws. The smell of rotten milk hung in the air. The throne was rotten. There was no gold, no fabrics, only darkness. People avoid this place. Even birds do not fly here. It is like a coffin full of voices." Many later claimed that these events marked the end of the last formal unity of the Golden Horde. They were followed by a series of rapid collapses, disintegrations, and bloody uprisings. Khans changed every season, some even more often. Old families were exterminated or disappeared without a trace. New cults emerged, worshipping not the Khan, but a woman in the snow called the Ice Mother. She was depicted with a dead baby in her arms, standing on a throne sinking beneath the ice. Thus ended the dynasty that had ruled for centuries, and so began an era in which no one called themselves a descendant of the Great One, because decay did not just destroy the body, it poisoned the very idea of power.